The Millionaire's triplets had only 1 week to live until their new nanny did the impossible. A thin veil of morning mist covered the seaside mansion. The waves brushed softly against the cliffs, sounding like the faint breath of a dying world. Inside the private medical suite, bright, polished, and cold, Alexander Reed stood silently, his hands gripping the edge of the metal table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. In front of him, Dr. Raymond Cole spoke with a trembling, hoarse voice. "Alexander, I'm so sorry. Your daughters have only 1 week left." The words fell like a blade of ice, slicing through the air. The ticking of the clock echoed in the silence, each beat cutting deeper into his heart. Alexander didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the framed photo on his desk. 3 identical faces, Emma, Sophie, and Clara, smiling under the sunlight. That picture, once his greatest pride, now felt like an open wound that refused to heal. Dr. Cole lowered his head. "We've tried everything, new drugs, overseas treatments, stem cell research. But their bodies are exhausted. The disease is too aggressive. I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do." Alexander shook his head, his voice breaking with despair. "No, you don't understand. I have money, I have power, I have connections. Just tell me what I have to pay to keep them alive." Cole looked at him with deep sorrow. "Money can't buy time, Alex. I'm sorry." Silence swallowed the room. Pale light filtered through the glass, reflecting on the face of a man once praised as a visionary of modern technology. Now, nothing more than a father broken by grief. Alexander left the room without another word. Along the long corridor, the nurses lowered their heads as he passed, as if they too could feel the weight of the sentence just delivered. He opened the door to the large bedroom where his daughters lay. Beneath the white sheets, their small, fragile bodies seemed to breathe with the last whisper of life. Clara, the weakest, opened her eyes slightly and whispered, "Daddy, I'm so tired." Her voice was so faint that Alexander had to lean close to hear it. He placed his hand on her forehead. Her skin was cold. His heart was burning. "Don't say that, my little angel. I won't let you go." Sophie, the always cheerful one, forced a weak smile. "Don't cry, Daddy." Her words made his tears fall, heavy as stones. Alexander sat beside them, holding all 3 of their hands. His own trembled, but he held tight, afraid that if he let go, they would vanish forever. "I promised your mother I'd protect you, no matter what. I've never broken a promise. And I won't start now." When night fell, Alexander stayed alone in his office. Stacks of medical reports, lists of world-renowned doctors, and unsigned treatment contracts lay before him. He made calls, pleaded, negotiated, even offered unimaginable sums of money. But the only answer he received was, "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. There's nothing left we can do." The clock struck 3 in the morning. Alexander rested his head on the desk, drained of all strength. The sound of the sea drifted through the window like a distant cry of fate. Only one phrase echoed in his mind, again and again, like a funeral bell tolling in the dark. 1 week? Only 1 week? And from that moment on, time stopped for Alexander Reed. The next morning, the sky above the coast was the color of cold ash. The entire Reed mansion was wrapped in a heavy silence. Since the doctor's verdict, no one dared to speak above a whisper. The servants moved quietly, their footsteps soft, their faces pale. Alexander hadn't left his office all night. On his desk sat half-drunk cups of coffee and unopened medical files. His body seemed trapped inside an invisible prison of despair. His eyes were sunken, red from sleeplessness. Outside, rumors began to spread. The Reed family is preparing for a funeral. In that air of mourning, a stranger appeared at the main gate. She wore a worn beige coat and carried a small, battered suitcase. Her face showed fatigue, but her eyes were calm and gentle. Grace Miller, 30 years old, ordinary in every way, except for her gaze, which carried a kind of peace the world had long forgotten. The gatekeeper frowned. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to apply for the caregiver position, for the 3 girls." He eyed her suspiciously. "You? Do you have any medical training or nursing license?" Grace smiled faintly. "No, but I know how to care for people." The man hesitated, then reluctantly let her in, following Alexander's desperate order to hire anyone who can stay with them. As Grace stepped through the large wooden doors, she could feel the weight of every stare, cold, doubtful, dismissive. The head housekeeper, a stern-looking woman, glanced at her from head to toe and scoffed. "You're here for the job? Listen, trained nurses can't last 2 days here. What makes you think you'll be any different?" Grace replied softly, "I didn't come to prove anything. I just came to be with them." The woman shook her head. "Suit yourself, but don't expect much. Those girls won't last the week." Moments later, Alexander appeared at the top of the staircase. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his voice sharp. "Who are you?" "My name is Grace Miller, sir. I'm here for the caregiver position." "I need doctors, not a girl with no qualifications," he snapped. Grace lifted her head, her tone quiet but steady. "What your daughters need isn't more medicine, Mr. Reed. They need someone who will keep them from being afraid to close their eyes." The room fell silent. Alexander froze, words caught in his throat. Finally he turned away and muttered, "Do what you want. Just don't disturb them." Grace entered the room where the 3 girls lay. Soft light filtered through the white curtains, touching their pale faces. Emma, Sophie, and Clara lay close together, their breaths faint and fragile. Grace walked closer, sat beside them, and gently brushed their tangled hair. It had been so long since anyone had touched them without gloves. Sophie opened her eyes first. "Who are you?" she whispered. Grace smiled. "Someone who will stay with you, no matter what happens." The girls stared at her, not because they understood, but because they felt something medicine could never explain: tenderness. That night, while the entire mansion slept, Grace remained by their bedside. She didn't read charts or check machines. She sang, a soft lullaby, warm as fire in winter. It was the same song she once sang for her little sister, who had died years ago from the same illness. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she smiled through them, whispering, "I couldn't save you, but I'll save them." Outside, the sea breeze moved through the window, carrying the scent of salt and the rhythm of waves. Inside, the 3 girls slept peacefully, for the first time in months, free of pain and fear. On the second day after Grace arrived, the Reed mansion still felt like it was wrapped in a damp, heavy blanket. Yet within that silence, something small had begun to change. Gentle sounds, faint but real, that stirred the hearts of those who had forgotten what hope felt like. Grace woke before dawn. She entered the girls' room while the house was still asleep. Morning light streamed through the window, touching the pale faces of Emma, Sophie, and Clara. They were still sleeping, their breaths thin as silk. But something was different. Their expressions were peaceful. Grace smiled softly. She dipped a cloth into warm water and began to wipe their faces, slowly, tenderly, as if afraid to disturb their fragile dreams. When her hand brushed Emma's cheek, the little girl whispered in her sleep, "It's warm." Grace's voice trembled as she replied, "That's the morning light, my love." When the girls woke, Grace brought them 3 cups of herbal tea. The scent of chamomile and honey filled the room, replacing the sharp smell of disinfectant. Sophie sniffed the cup and smiled. "It smells like home." It was the first genuine smile anyone had seen in weeks. Grace sat beside them and began telling stories about the sea, about the birds, about her little sister who once dreamed of flying. The girls listened, eyes wide, their gazes bright as if reliving memories they never had. Downstairs, the servants whispered, "What is she doing? Singing? Telling stories?" Another scoffed, "It won't change anything. Illness is illness." Yet no one could deny it. When Grace passed through the hall, the air itself seemed softer. That afternoon, Alexander walked past the girls' room by chance. He stopped. From behind the door came the sound of soft laughter, the rustle of turning pages, and Grace's voice, light as wind. He opened the door just slightly and froze. Before him was a sight he thought he'd never see again. Emma resting her head on Grace's shoulder, Sophie smiling as she listened, and Clara, the weakest, slowly moving her hand toward Grace's, her tiny fingers trembling but unmistakably alive. Alexander stepped back, his heart pounding. Impossible! He closed the door, leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by something he couldn't name. Instead of entering, he walked away. Pride and fear still chained him tight. That night, Grace sat by the girl's bedside again. Candlelight flickered across her face, fragile yet strong. "Miss Grace," Sophie whispered, "can we go outside tomorrow, just for a little while, to see the sun?" Grace looked out the window at the moon shining over the sea, then nodded. "If you promise to listen, then yes. Tomorrow we'll greet the sun together." At dawn, before anyone else awoke, Grace helped the girls out of bed. Every movement was gentle, patient. They went down to the garden, wrapped in wool blankets on small chairs. Sunlight filtered through the trees, touching their pale faces. They squinted, then smiled. For the first time in months, laughter echoed through the reed garden. Sophie picked a flower and tucked it into Emma's hair, and the three giggled together. From an upstairs window, a maid stared down in disbelief. "They're laughing, truly laughing." In his office, Alexander heard the sound. He rose, stepped onto the balcony, and froze. Below him, his daughters, the children medicine had already given up on, were sitting beneath the morning sun, alive, radiant, and laughing. That scene should have filled him with gratitude, yet instead, a storm of emotions rose inside him, a bitter gnawing doubt. "No," he whispered to himself, "it's impossible that just a few stories, a few cups of tea, could make my daughters better." Alexander turned away, grabbed the glass of whiskey from the table, and emptied it in one long swallow. He wanted to believe the girl's recovery came from the medicine, from the tireless efforts of the best doctors money could buy. But deep down, he knew the truth. Those doctors had done nothing. That evening, he summoned Grace to his office. She entered quietly, her hands still scented with lavender from the girls' room. "Sit down," he said, his voice hoarse and firm. "We need to talk." Grace sat, calm and composed. "Oh, what are you doing with my children?" Alexander demanded, his tone heavy as stone. "I'm caring for them, sir," Grace replied softly. "No, I want the truth. Since you arrived, they've been changing, smiling, eating, moving, but no one can explain why. What are you giving them? Or is it something else?" His voice dropped, edged with accusation. Grace met his gaze without fear. "I give them nothing but love, Mr. Reed, the one thing they've been missing for a long time." Alexander let out a dry, angry laugh. "Love? Are you telling me your lullabies can replace medicine and science?" Grace's answer was quiet but unwavering. "Love doesn't replace medicine. It gives people a reason to live long enough for medicine to save them." Her words hung in the air. Alexander gripped his glass so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "Do you think I don't love my children? I've spent a fortune on the best doctors. I've sacrificed everything." And in doing so, Grace said gently but firmly, you stopped seeing the simplest truth, that what those girls need isn't a miracle. They just need their father to hold their hands. Alexander froze. The words pierced through the armor of pride he'd worn all his life. But instead of surrendering, he erupted. "Get out!" he shouted, the glass crashing to the floor. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I don't need anyone to teach me how to be a father." Grace stood. Her voice trembled not with anger, but with sorrow. "I'm not teaching you anything, Mr. Reed. I'm reminding you that sometimes people don't die from illness. They die from forgetting what it feels like to be loved." She left the room, leaving him standing alone in the cold silence. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. Through the quiet halls he heard a soft melody, Grace's voice singing. The tune struck him like lightning. His late wife used to sing that very song to the girls. His chest tightened. For years he had buried everything connected to her. The pain was too great. Yet now that melody, that memory, was alive again. Through a stranger. In the middle of the night, he went to the girls' room. Through the cracked door, he saw Grace sitting beside them, singing softly, her fingers intertwined with little Clara's. The three girls slept peacefully, color returning to their cheeks. Alexander stood in the doorway, unable to move. In that moment, he was no longer the powerful businessman, only a lonely man witnessing the love he had once lost, returning in the gentlest form. At dawn, he called Dr. Cole for another checkup. The doctor flipped through the charts, his eyes widening. "This is remarkable. All three girls show stable vitals. Heart rate, reflexes, oxygen levels. Everything's improving." Alexander sat motionless. "You mean they're getting better?" Dr. Cole nodded slowly. "I don't know how, but yes, I've never seen anything like this thing." When the doctor left, Alexander remained by the window. Outside, Grace was teaching the girls how to fold paper cranes. Sunlight danced through her hair like fire. He whispered under his breath, almost afraid to believe it. "Maybe she's right." Yet even as a spark of faith began to grow inside him, Alexander couldn't fully let go. Between reason and love, he was still trapped, a man who had spent a lifetime buying everything, now learning to trust the one thing that could never be bought. Hope. Weeks passed, and the Reedwood mansion changed as if it had been awakened from a long coma. A place once filled with the smell of medicine and the silence of death was now bathed in light and children's laughter. The scent of chamomile tea, of baked bread, of life itself drifted through every doorway. The maids whispered to each other, "Miss Grace is strange. Since she came, the whole house seems to breathe again." Yes, those three girls, it's like they just walked out of death's hands. No one knows how she did it. All we know is she never stops smiling, even when there are tears in her eyes. But Alexander Reed didn't smile. Even though he saw his daughters growing stronger every day, he still didn't dare believe. Because to believe would mean admitting that something existed beyond logic and science, and that terrified him. Inside him raged a silent war, between the desperate father praying for a miracle and the proud man who could not kneel before faith. One afternoon, the sky turned dark. Clouds rolled in, wind howled through the window frames like mourning voices. In the room, Grace sat telling stories. Clara, the youngest of the three sisters, rested her head in Grace's lap, her voice thin as thread. "Miss Grace, when someone dies, do they really become a star in the sky?" Grace lowered her head slightly, her voice soft but warm like a winter breath. "I believe they do. Every good soul becomes a star, so those left behind won't have to walk in the dark." Clara bit her lip, her eyes glistening. "If I become a star, will you still see me?" Grace's throat tightened. Her lips trembled. "If that ever happens, I'll look up every night, But darling, don't become a star when you can still shine right here. Thunder cracked across the sky. The three girls curled up, trembling. Grace pulled them close, whispering as she sang, her voice breaking in the wind. Sleep, little stars. Tonight I'll guard your dreams. But that night, a star almost went out. Clara developed a fever, at first just a little warmth, then fire. She gasped for air, her eyes unfocused, her skin pale as wax. Grace touched her forehead and froze. No, this can't be. She was fine. She ran out, screaming, "Call Dr. Cole! Now!" Thunder roared. Footsteps thundered. The mansion jolted awake. Alexander rushed upstairs, face drained of color. What happened? Clara's in danger. Her heart is failing. He fell to his knees beside her bed, holding her burning hand that was growing weaker by the second. "Sweetheart, it's Daddy. Please hear me." But Clara didn't respond. Only shallow breaths, like a candle flickering in the wind. Emma and Sophie cried out, "Daddy, don't let her die." Lightning split the sky. The whole room shook. Grace tried to stay calm, though her hands trembled violently. "Get me cold water, towels, honey, now!" Alexander shouted. "No one's answering. The storm cut off the signal." He slammed his fist against the wall, eyes wild. Grace turned to him, her voice breaking but firm. "Then you'll have to trust me. If you can't trust me, at least trust your daughter." "Trust?" he roared. "I trusted God. I trusted science. And they all betrayed me," Grace shouted back, tears streaming down her face. "No one betrayed you, Alexander. You just forgot. Love is also a kind of medicine." The words struck through his pride like lightning. He had no strength left to fight. He gave her everything. Grace knelt beside Clara, pressing on the girl's chest, her voice trembling. "Breathe, sweetheart. Clara, look at me. Just one more breath." But Clara was still. Her small body twitched once, then went limp. "No, no," Sophie screamed, collapsing to the floor. Alexander broke down, pressing his hand to his daughter's chest. Empty. No heartbeat. Time shattered into pieces. He cried, a sound no one had ever heard from him before. "No, no, my baby, don't go. I'm sorry. I never told you I love you. Please don't go." He turned to Grace, wild-eyed. "You said you'd save them. You said they'd live." Grace shook her head, tears falling. "I never promised a miracle. I only promised she wouldn't face her last breath alone." Then she leaned down, both hands on Clara's chest, pressing again. "Breathe, my love. Come on. No one has the right to take you from these arms." Alexander shouted, "Stop! You're torturing her!" Grace didn't stop. She kept pressing, kept singing through sobs and thunder. "Little star, don't leave my sky." And then, a cough, soft, fragile, but enough to freeze the world. Clara coughed again, then breathed. Her tiny chest rose and fell. "She's breathing," Sophie cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. Alexander trembled, pulling his daughter into his arms. "My child, you're still here. Thank God. Thank you." Grace collapsed on the floor, her hand still on Clara's chest, whispering, "That's it, sweetheart. Breathe. I'm right here." Alexander looked up. For the first time, his eyes held no coldness, only gratitude and remorse. You saved my daughter." Grace shook her head, smiling weakly. "No, Mr. Reed. I just rekindled what you'd forgotten. Love. It was love that brought her back to you." The next morning, the storm was gone. The sky was impossibly blue. In that room, sunlight touched the water drops on the window, sparkling like the tears left from last night. Alexander sat by the bed, telling stories to his three girls. When Clara coughed, he flinched. When she laughed, he laughed too. The cold man who once feared emotion now trembled at every breath his children took. Sophie whispered to her sister, "Dad's changed." Emma smiled. He's learned how to love again. That day, Alexander brought a bouquet of lavender, the flower his late wife once loved. He placed it in the room and said softly, "We'll plant the garden again, the one your mother adored. When the wind blows, she'll know we're still waiting." The girls cheered. Grace stood behind them, watching silently. Her smile was gentle as sunlight after a storm, the smile of someone who had just witnessed life return from death. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. The Reed girls have recovered. People whispered it across the town. Doctors didn't believe it. Reporters called, demanding interviews, eager to write about the miracle at Reedwood Manor. But Alexander Reed refused them all. "There was no miracle," he said quietly, his voice low and rough like gravel. "There was only someone who didn't give up when everyone else did." Then he turned away, allowing no further questions. Meanwhile, Grace went on as if nothing had happened. She never spoke of that night, never told, never accepted thanks. In the morning, she brewed chamomile tea. In the afternoon, she read stories. At night, she sang lullabies. The house that had once been as cold as stone slowly grew warm again, not from the fireplace, but from the warmth of people. The scent of baked bread mingled with children's laughter. The steam of tea curled past the windows, and sunlight slipped through the curtains like a whisper from someone who once loved this place. Every time Alexander walked down the hallway, he stopped. Just stopped. He didn't speak, didn't want to shatter that fragile peace. He saw Grace's hand resting gently on his daughter's forehead, saw her weary but tender smile, heard her soft voice. "Sleep, sweetheart. There's nothing to fear tonight." And he understood, not with his mind, but with his heart, that this woman had brought him back to life. That night, when the house was asleep, little Clara, the one who had once hovered between life and death, whispered, "Daddy." Alexander looked up. "Yes, my love?" Clara spoke in a tiny voice, as if afraid the wind might hear her. "Last night, I dreamed of Mom. She told me I should smile more. She said my smile makes your heart warm again." The simple words pierced through the armor of ice around his heart. He bent down and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for reminding me. Your mother was always right." Clara smiled, gently squeezing his hand. "You should smile more too, Daddy. Mom will see you." From that day on, Reedwood Manor was no longer a house of illness and shadows. Every night, golden light glowed through its windows. The laughter of 3 little girls blended with Grace's soft singing that drifted through the wind. Those who once said, "Only money can save a life," now stood silent, unable to argue. And Alexander, each time he walked through the garden, looked up at the sky. He had replanted the lavender bushes, the flowers Laura, his late wife, had loved. The wind carried their scent, touching his skin, his memories, the ache he'd never spoken aloud. He closed his eyes and whispered into the open air. "Laura, if you can hear me, thank you. Thank you for sending Grace to us." That morning the garden was bathed in light. Dew still clung to the lavender leaves, glimmering like tiny crystals. The 3 little girls, Emma, Sophie, and Clara, walked slowly along the stone path. Their steps were still weak, but their smiles were full of life. Each breath they took was like a hymn of rebirth. From a distance, Grace watched them. The sunlight caught her hair, turning it into golden threads. Every day the girls grew stronger, laughed louder, and called her name with voices pure as spring water. "Miss Grace." She smiled softly, her heart overflowing with peace. For years she had carried sleepless nights and the ghost of her lost sister. But today, as she watched the 3 girls holding hands beneath the sun, she knew the promise she once made had finally been fulfilled. Emma tugged gently at her hand. Miss Grace, why do you always smile when you look at us?" Grace knelt down, her fingers brushing through the child's soft hair. "Because you three are the reason I found peace again in my heart." The three pairs of eyes widened with wonder, and Grace continued, her voice trembling, yet warm as the morning light. "When I was little, I had a younger sister named Lily. She always smiled, fragile but brave. Before she left, she told me, 'If one day you meet someone who needs love like I did, love them for me.' Since that day, I've carried her words in my heart, walking on until I found you." For a moment, no one spoke. Only the wind whispered through the flowers. Clara stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Grace. "So, we're the ones you love for your sister?" Grace nodded, her eyes glistening but her smile radiant. "Not just for her. Now, you're a part of my heart." From afar, Alexander Reed approached. He stopped for a few seconds, watching, his daughters laughing in the sunlight, holding the woman who had changed everything. His face no longer cold, but softened with gratitude and awe. "Grace," he said quietly, voice trembling, "you've given this house what I never could: faith, laughter, and love." Grace stood, about to speak, but Alexander gently rested his hand on her shoulder. "You're no longer just an employee," he said, his eyes shining in the light. "You're family." The three girls cheered, grabbing both their father's and Grace's hands, pulling them toward the center of the garden. Beneath the morning sun, 4 hands intertwined, glowing amid the tender green and the scent of blooming roses. The wind drifted by, soft as a blessing. Grace lifted her gaze to the sky, warmth spreading through her chest. Somewhere, she could almost feel Lily smiling. And as Alexander, Grace, and the 3 girls walked together through the garden, the sun rose beyond the horizon, painting the world in brilliant gold. That evening, Grace sat on the swing, watching the father and his daughters play, whispering softly, "Lily, I kept my promise to you. I'm not hurting anymore." The breeze brushed her hair, a gentle touch from heaven. 5 years passed. The garden by the sea was now filled with laughter and light. The rows of lavender that Alex had once planted with his frail hands were in full bloom. Vibrant, alive, the 3 girls, Emma, Sophie, and Clara, were no longer the fragile, delicate figures they used to be. They ran across the garden, hair flying in the wind, their laughter mingling with the distant sound of the waves. Every time Grace looked at them, her heart tightened, not from worry, but from pure happiness. On the porch, Alexander Reed stood silently, his eyes following his daughters, as if he still couldn't quite believe the miracle before him. Beside him, Grace watered the flowers, her hair tied up with a few loose strands brushing her cheeks, the afternoon light wrapping around her like a golden ribbon. They had walked through long years, sleepless nights, tears, and tiny miracles. And now, everything in that house seemed to breathe peace. That Christmas, snow fell gently over the tiled roof. Inside the warm, fire-lit room, Alexander placed his hand on the table, where a small ring glimmered in the candlelight. His voice was deep and steady. "Grace, you've given me the life I thought I had lost. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that miracles only exist when we dare to believe. I believe in you, in us, and in this love." Grace froze for a moment, her eyes brimming with tears. No words were needed. Only the look they shared, full of gratitude and tenderness, became a vow for a lifetime. They were married the following spring, in the same garden where the first roses of the year had just bloomed. There was no luxury, only flowers, wind, and the laughter of 3 little girls weaving garlands into their mother's hair. Time flowed gently. One radiant morning, as the 3 girls blew out the candles on their birthday cake, Grace took Alexander's hand, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Darling," she whispered, "our family is about to grow." Alexander stood still, then smiled, a smile brighter than any Grace had ever seen. He pulled the three girls close, and the whole family embraced in a circle of sunlight. And then, the following September, the first cry of a newborn baby girl echoed through the seaside mansion, a new beginning, as tender and complete as the first breath of dawn. That evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Grace leaned against Alexander's shoulder, cradling their sleeping baby. In the garden below, Emma, Sophie, and Clara ran barefoot through the lavender rows, their laughter blending with the rhythm of the waves, the same waves that once carried grief, now carrying only joy. Alexander spoke softly, his voice deep and full of emotion. "Do you hear that? That laughter? It's the most beautiful sound in the world." Grace smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yes, and it will never fade as long as we keep believing in love."